nice to be with you, Mike. How are you doing?
Very good. I want to get into a couple issues that you're very involved in, and a lot of people are certainly hoping that you'll be successful, and that's stopping the Department of Labor with their youth labor rule, and of course trying to get rid of the death tax. We'll get to those in just a moment. But first, your thoughts on the Farm Bill, this whole process we're going through, and the chances of getting one done this year. Are you optimistic that we'll get a Farm Bill this year?
I think it's 50-50, Mike. My hope is that we can get at least a bill produced out of the Ag Committee and moved across the Senate floor. The probably bigger question this year is the House of Representatives, where passing the Farm Bill is going to be a very heavy lift. But I think in terms of the window of opportunity that we have, something's going to happen fairly quickly here, probably in late spring, early summer, and by then I think we'll know whether we're going to get a bill ultimately passed and hopefully signed into law this year. As you know, if we don't, on September 30th, the current bill expires, and we'd have to do some sort of an extension of the existing law or revert to 1949 law, which nobody wants to be talking about. So I'm really hopeful that we can come up with something that not only provides an appropriate safety net for farmers across this country, but also makes the reforms that are necessary to achieve savings in a budgetary climate where that's really going to be necessary.
Would you be comfortable with a one-year extension of the current bill as is?
If that would be the last resort, obviously. I mean, I think if we came to where we were at the end of the year, it was clear we weren't going to be able to move a new multi-year bill, then that may be the only option available to us. But that certainly would be, I think, a last resort. My view is we need to do everything we can to try and produce a new bill, that puts policy in place for multiple years that farmers and ranchers can rely upon when they're making decisions.
There's a push, of course, to cut ag spending, but perhaps increase funding for nutrition programs, which is a part of the ag budget, part of the Farm Bill. Are you comfortable with that, going with spending cuts but increased funding for nutrition programs?
Well, look, I think that what we have to do, if we're serious about writing a Farm Bill that really does not only address the needs that we have in farm country, but also is conscientious about the very difficult fiscal circumstances the country's in right now, we've got to look at every area of the budget. And I'm uncomfortable with the idea of having a disproportionate share of reductions coming out of the commodity title of the Farm Bill and having all these other areas perhaps even get plus-ups. I think that the food stamp program, which has grown by 47% since this president took office, needs to be looked at. We ought to be able to find some efficiencies, some ways to do to meet the needs that program needs in a more efficient way that saves money for the taxpayers. And so that also needs to be a part of the discussion on the Farm Bill, because right now that's about 84 cents out of every dollar that gets spent. If you look at what actually is spent on production agriculture today, and you add up crop insurance, the commodity title of the Farm Bill, and conservation programs, you look at about 16 cents on the dollar. The rest is nutrition, food stamps, and those other programs.
We're talking with South Dakota Senator John Thune, who has introduced a bill that would abolish the federal death tax. Tell us about this bill and what kind of response and support are you getting for it?
So far, pretty good, Mike. There are a lot of people out there, I think, in farm country for sure, and I think even other places around the country, who don't believe that death should be a taxable event. And what my bill would do is it would do away with it. It is a very inefficient tax. There are a lot of estimates and analysis that have been done that suggest that it actually costs more to comply with and collect the death tax than it actually generates in terms of revenue. And, the fact is that people in this country who create businesses, small businesses, farm and ranch operations, ought to have the opportunity to be able to transfer those and create an intergenerational business opportunity for future generations today. That's in great jeopardy because of the death tax. And in fact, if we don't do something before the end of the year, it snaps back to a $1 million exemption and a 55% top rate, which would be absolutely devastating to agriculture. So the bill would repeal it, and I hope that we can continue to build support for that. Right now, I think we have somewhere on the order of about 40 co-sponsors in the Senate.
And it would also maintain the stepped-up basis, right?
That is correct. Yes, it would. Yeah, that's a very important component of the bill.
The chances, though, in this climate of repealing something that I'm sure some of your colleagues probably look at as, hey, you're trying to cut money coming into the government at a time we're trying to, fix this financial situation. Does that make it a harder sell right now, even though we know how agriculture feels about it? But what about trying to convince your colleagues in Washington?
Well, I think the key in all this is to try as best we can to make the argument that this is not a tax that makes sense. And if you're looking at a revenue system, if you were going to build a revenue system for this country, the notion that you would tax people on what they make during their lifetimes, on what they spend, on what they acquire in terms of wealth, and then tax them again when they die, I don't think that's a tax policy that you would probably put in place. So what we're trying to help people recognize here is that this is an inefficient tax. It is a tax that taxes death. It is a tax that, for all intents and purposes, makes it very, very difficult for farm and ranch operations and families to be able to pass that operation on to the next generation. And then in the context of tax reform, and I do hope we get to a big debate about tax reform in this country, really look at our tax code, our tax structure, and say, is this a tax that makes sense? You're right. It does come back to the question about how are you going to raise revenue, how are you going to fund the government, and particularly at a time when we're running huge deficits. But I believe that when we come to the end of the year and a lot of these current tax provisions expire, we're going to have a very robust debate about the tax code in this country, which I hope leads to comprehensive tax reform and an opportunity to get rid of the death tax, perhaps look at other ways, more efficient ways of raising revenue for the federal government.
I don't know which is tougher, to get rid of something that's on the books or to try to keep something from getting on the books. And that's another area you're working on right now. You're trying, along with Kansas Senator Moran and others, to try to stop these Department of Labor proposed regulations that would restrict youth working on family farms. Tell us about your effort here.
Right. Well, it is, Mike. As you mentioned, it's kind of a target-rich environment right now in Washington between all the farm bill discussions that are out there, the proliferation of regulations that are coming out of Washington, the taxes that agriculture has to comply with and deal with all the time. It's amazing in many respects that we've had as a strong agricultural sector, prosperous agricultural sector as we had the last few years. But one of the things that could really cast a real wet blanket on that are these regulations coming out of Washington, and in particular the ones that we're focused on, as you mentioned, the Moran bill, my bill, deal with these Department of Labor regulations that would radically change the way in which young people can work in family farms and operations in this country. And I think that it's really important that we take some steps to prevent those regulations from going into effect. I can't tell you how many people out here from across South Dakota have become aware of this and say, are you kidding me? What are these people thinking out there, and what parallel universe are they living in? Because people in agriculture understand that it is part of our culture. Farming is inherently a family enterprise, and it's something that we've been doing for generations, and young people grow up learning how to contribute to the success of that family farming operation. And these new rules coming out of the Department of Labor would prevent many of the activities, many of the work opportunities that young people in agriculture have today, and it's just absolutely crazy to think that the federal government, in its infinite wisdom, would know better about how to, have young people work on farms and ranches and with the people who actually run those, in many cases, their family operations. So we're going to do everything we can. It's 85 pages, if you can imagine, of regulations that it took the Department of Labor to come up with to tell young people that they can't work at heights of more than 6 feet, they can't work with farm animals that are more than 6 months old, they can't work with many forms of equipment on farms. It's just absolutely crazy.
I think this issue has replaced DUST and EPA as the poster child for government regulatory overreach.
Well, it really has, and if you think about it, I sometimes, and there are many proposals that have come out of the Environmental Protection Agency, which farmers and ranchers are really worked up about, and frankly they should be, because there's some pretty crazy stuff coming out of there too. But this Department of Labor proposal has really just, I think, crystallized the belief that a lot of people in farm country have that the federal government doesn't get it, that there are a lot of bureaucrats in Washington, D.C., clearly with too much time on their hands, who are coming up with some pretty bizarre ideas, and frankly, in most cases, probably have no idea what it takes to succeed and what it takes to make a family farming or ranching operation in this country work.
So, how optimistic should we be that you can actually head off the Department of Labor on these things?
Well, we've so far, I don't know, Mike. We don't, it really becomes a function of math. You have the votes or you don't. And the bill itself, which would prevent these regulations from going into effect, we will try and get voted on. I think the pressure that we've already brought has backed them off a little bit. They've slowed everything down. They've delayed the implementation of these rules. I think the pressure that's coming from people across this country and their elected leaders has already had an effect. But in order to get this stopped, we're going to have to ratchet that pressure up a little bit more. So I hope that hardworking people in farm country will be very engaged in this debate with their elected leaders and make it clear to them that they want something done to stop this from happening. It is a regulatory agency. The only way that Congress can stop it is by enacting some piece of legislation. And, we have, even though we've got a lot of co-sponsors on this bill, it would be a very heavy lift to get it passed in the Senate, but we're going to do everything we can to make that happen.
And short of that, could you stop it by stopping the funds, stopping the money from implementing it?
That'll be one opportunity we'll be looking forward to when we get into the appropriation season, and the appropriation bills will start moving here probably in the next couple of months. We will look for opportunities to amend those to prevent funds from being used to implement this rule. That is one way that you can address it, and you can stop it for 1 year because a funding bill only lasts for 1 year. But if you were to put a rider, an amendment on an appropriation bill that would prevent funding for this, that would be one way of getting at it as well. So we'll be looking for all legislative opportunities and vehicles to get the job done. But I just hope, for the sake of American agriculture, that they come to their senses over there and don't move forward with this, because this really is, in my view, crazy talk in terms of what it could mean and the implications it could have for the economy and farm country.
Senator, we always enjoy our visits. Appreciate your time. We hope to talk again soon. Thank you very much.
Good being with you. Thanks, Mike. See you.
Take care. South Dakota Senator John Thune.